Hello and welcome, viewers. My name is Kalu Abosi of Cameroon, and this is my testimony to your brother and sister. Chapter 1. My First Family. My parents were fishers and notorious witch doctors in Cameroon. We lived at Naka Quarters, Kumba, Cameroon. My name was Arena, and I had two younger sisters, Martha and Bayo. One day, during their fishing trips, my parents were involved in a boat accident, and they both drowned in the lake. My sisters, too, were later swept away during a flood. I attended school for a while, but my hope of going to school was dashed when a strange wind blew away my school uniform. Without having a way to fend for myself, I pleaded with one of my father's friends to allow me to go with them on their fishing trips. One day, while we were sailing, a storm came up against our boat, and we were all hurled into the lake. Chapter 2. My Capture into the Spirit World. After I fell into the water, in a twinkle of an eye, I realized that rather than being drowned, I found myself descending before a splendid palace in an unknown location. The edifice and its surroundings were beautiful, but the place was quiet. I walked in through the entrance in trepidation, and in one of the halls, I saw two young ladies who spoke to me in a foreign language. They knew I was a stranger, given my attire, and as I later learned, through interrogative gesticulation, they were asking me who I was, who brought me there, and where I came from. When their tauntings became unbearable, I became afraid and began to cry as they badgered me with questions in their language. The ladies began to make a jest of me until a glamorous woman appeared with two ladies, a lady on either side, making them all five. At the appearance of this beautiful woman with a commanding presence, they abruptly stopped laughing and bowed to her, gesturing what I later got to know was obeisance. The woman looked at me and introduced herself. I am the Queen of the Coast, and the ladies are my agents. Welcome to our kingdom. You are my special guest, whom I have been expecting for quite some time. Feel at home as you would be staying with me for now. She explained to me, your late parents were my servants, but they were too stubborn, and even though I gave them many opportunities to fulfill their obligations, they had become stubborn, and I had to eliminate them. She asked me, would you like to see your parents and sisters? I answered, yes. She took me to a spacious room with its floor well tiled and very neat. She went to a cupboard and opened it, showing me my parents' decapitated heads. I was struck with grief. She went over to open another cupboard and showed me my sisters' heads, all looking freshly preserved. I broke down and cried and confronted the queen. How wicked you are for killing my family. She grew annoyed and said, stop your emotional outbursts. I will kill you if you do not cooperate with me. I spared you only because I loved you. You are going to continue from where your parents had stopped. She ordered her male agents to take off my fishing rags and give me a new set of shirt and trouser to wear. I didn't realize it at the time, but this was my first initiation. The design of their shirts and trousers was different from that used here on Earth. The queen took me to a spiritual operation room where I saw assorted candles in various shapes, colors, and forms. One of the candles was shaped like a man and had the wick on its head where it's lit. The queen took me to another room that looked high-tech. The computers there were like big white refrigerators. The queen smiled at me and told me to open up one of the computers, but I was too afraid to do so, for that was my first brush with technology. The queen simply moved her hand up, and the screen cover of the computer opened, showing the data stored in the system. On it, I could see the bodily materials removed from my parents and sisters, which had been stored in it, including the percentage composition of these materials. The queen explained to me, there are 33,000 demigods in my kingdom, and I will see to it that you visit our chief very soon. Satan is our president, but you aren't qualified to meet him yet. But when that time comes for you to go back to the earth plane, I will make the meeting possible. Chapter 3. The Market in the Beast. As a neophyte, I was told I would be put through training sessions in the palace. These were series of lectures undertook by different appointed teachers each day who would leave for me pamphlets to study before the next study. The lectures were delivered according to topics and dealt with my purpose and assignments. At this point, they attuned me to their language. Some of what I was taught were quite inexplicable, but I had lots of questions during the lectures. how possible it would be for me to return to Earth with my face without my people being afraid. Who would be my parents now, since the former were dead? Where in the world would I return to, etc.? My lecturers told me answers will be provided when the time comes. I asked them how many years I had spent in their kingdom as of that time. I was told 9 years. Apparently, to me, it looked like few months. The meals served there were flesh and blood, which I couldn't partake of, so an agent was assigned to supply me with assorted fruit while I waited behind the door each day. Later on, I was introduced to a tree outside, at a location. This tree had all kinds of fruit growing on it, so whenever I was hungry, I would go out there to feed myself. One day, the queen called me into her private chamber and told me about the benefits of eating their meal, human flesh and blood. She told me, there is nothing really bad in it. You actually need to eat human flesh and blood if you are going to succeed in your assignment. I said, I might try the flesh if it was cooked. But the queen blatantly told me, nothing is cooked here. I promised to try it, and they locked me in a room containing about 5 refrigerators containing human flesh. After a length of time, I finally decided to try the ones that were not too fresh in there. Those kept there for a while. When I tasted it, I felt like spitting it out because it was tasteless. But from that day onwards, I couldn't explain the mystery. I began to relish flesh and blood so much that I was often the first to finish my meal whenever it was served. When the queen opened the door to the room that day and found out I had tried it for the first time, she was so excited that she arranged for me to be taken on an outing. An agent drove the car, which looked like the exotic computerized cars seen in some cartoons or sci-fi movies, and the queen took me on a tour of the entire kingdom. The houses and roads there were very beautiful and neat, but there were no people in the streets. I was also taken by the Queen of the Coast to visit the chief of the demigods, who then arrayed me with powers. After this, the queen sent for me one day for a special outing, and they took another high-tech car to a location in that realm. They alighted at a location. There was a swimming pool there containing a small quantity of water, about 17 buckets. She chanted a long incantation, and the floor of the pool opened up, and an enormous beast arose from its depth. It stood menacingly, looking at both of us. Then the queen spoke to it in an unknown language which the beast understood. The queen turned towards me and told me not to fear and promised to come to pick me up after my adventure. As she turned to leave, I wanted to flee with her away from the beast, but to my utter surprise, I found myself right in its big paws, like a grain of sand. It examined me carefully and then threw me right into its mouth. I saw myself descending to see an extensive supermarket that outmatched the world's biggest store in size and beauty. They had sections, and each one contained all the materials or accessories used here on Earth, from toys to computers to musical instruments to beauty products to occult books. On the shelves holding these demonic books, I found it clearly written that these are books used by magic and occult practitioners in the physical world. I also visited the section having human flesh and blood, and I ate and drank to my fill and continued in my tour. Eventually, the queen showed up at the tail end of the gigantic store and took me home in the car. The queen told me, your assignment is to transport all those goods you saw in the beast to the earth plane by all means possible. Shortly after this experience, I was sitting with the queen in her chamber one day, and the place was filled with an array of glamorous ladies who were her agents with messages to deliver to her on their assignments. Each of them would first pay the queen an obeisance and then offer to me another type of obeisance, to which I responded. I asked the queen, why are your agents paying me obeisance? She replied, your power and exposure in my kingdom far exceeds theirs. This made me glad. Chapter 4. My first meeting with Satan. The queen called me to a room one day and told me, before you are released back to the world, you must have a meeting with Satan, the president, but you are not yet spiritually qualified to stand in his presence, so I will have to stand with you. With that, she used her powers to divide herself into two, and I also into two, and at her command, our two halves stuck together, such that I wasn't standing alone, for the queen was standing with me, and vice versa. Then she called, and Lucifer appeared. Satan called me by my name, Arena, in its proper dialect, and he saw my prowess. I told him, I have been briefed and I know I am capable of working assiduously for the kingdom. To that end, I'm first going to be given a spiritual name. I was blindfolded and I was given a metal box of alphabets to pick from. I later realized that Satan and the Queen were collecting the letters from me and arranging them on the board in the wall. When it was done, my blindfold was removed and I saw the name Kashnaya Daska on the board. That was my working name. Satan told me, "You will be reborn in the world as a baby in order to fulfill your assignment, and you will choose your mother-to-be from the spirit world." At his command, the large screen in the room, which we now call plasma or LED TV, began to show faces of many women from across nationalities. As the pictures of these women rolled on the screen, I wasn't interested in them because the women were in no way compared to the glamorous ladies I had seen in the Queen's kingdom. The Queen seems to understand this, and at her command, the screen showed the pictures of 3 women, 1 light-skinned woman, and the other 2, dark-skinned. The Queen began to tell me the story of each of the women, and I came to love the light-skinned woman. The Queen told me she is a native of Abiriba in Imo State, now Abia State, Nigeria, and she is married to a man from a nearby town in the state. This woman had 5 children, but I was responsible for the death of her 1st, 3rd, and 5th children. The couple resides in Cameroon, but I want them to relocate to Nigeria, as this is where your assignment is marked out. Satan also showed me, on the screen, pictures of wealthy men and women, influential world figures, scientists, politicians, and religious leaders across the board who serve them and are working in their assignments. He eventually disappeared. The Queen then extricated her half-self from me and returned my other half to me. They monitored my parents-to-be from the screen in the spirit world for 2 consecutive days. The Queen first kept my mother-to-be sleepless with thoughts of her deceased children and manipulated her thoughts to supernaturally inquire the cause of their deaths. The Queen stirred up one of her friends to visit her the next morning, and after pouring out her heart to her, she opted to take her to a diviner to find out what lies beneath. She took her to the very one that the Queen had selected, one of her agents. The man inquired from his deities, but he had already been given a script by the Queen. Instead of revealing the causes of her children's death, he promised her that she will give birth to another child, a boy, who would bring prosperity to the family and erase her sorrow. He gave her detailed instructions on what to use before her next sexual relations with her husband. She wanted to offer him some money in appreciation, but the Queen signaled to him not to accept it, and he refused it. Then they left. When it was time to send me into the world, I was summoned to the Queen's private chamber, and she told me it's time for me to go into the world. She promised to enrich my would-be parents and be with me at all times. She affixed different rings in my fingers and toes. Some of these rings, she tightened them like they were nuts. She tied her hands and legs with a kind of cord. She opened a drawer and brought out a bottle and emptied its content on my palm. Then she began to chant an incantation. It was a long one. After she was done, the substance in my hand began to melt like ice, and I became a bit unconscious, and soon I realized I too was melting, and I continued melting till I melted into my mother's womb. Now in her womb, I didn't eat for 3 days because my mother's food was different from my food, which was human flesh and blood. The Queen observed this, so she began spiritually feeding me with a strange food that was neither flesh nor blood, and this continued till I was born. When I was born, I had been told some events would happen, and I laughed in my cot in anticipation. A nurse that was about to pick me up for circumcision was menstruating, and she fell down on her face, unable to get up in the hall. Another nurse who wasn't having her menses was called, and she succeeded. The reason the Queen of the Coast had much leeway in my family was because they weren't Christians. Had they been praying Christians, her plans would have been thwarted. Chapter 5. Mission Commissioned. Shortly after I was born, my father began to prosper in his business. He won some contracts, built a primary school, had farms, built a Presbyterian church, and was made an elder in the church in spite of his ignorance of the position of eldership. My family became wealthy, as the queen had promised. My friends and I would usually go into the farms and bushes some evenings to look for snails. Some of the boys were caught stealing the other boys' snails, so each boy decided to search for the snails on their own. While I was looking for snails in the woods one evening, the queen appeared and called out to me from one of the trees. She was gorgeously dressed and held a purse in her hand. She told me that my father had infuriated her by building a church for the community, and she was going to retrieve all her riches from him. She flashed the content of the purse to me and dropped it in my snail sack. She told me that the money would be for my personal upkeep and was to be securely hidden from others. She disappeared, and when I looked into the sack, I realized the snails I picked had become bigger in size when the purse touched them. My friends were all amazed at how and where I found such big snails and tried to peep into my sack, but when they saw that I wasn't releasing my hold on the sack and was too serious, they let me go. I hid the purse by burying it somewhere around the house. On another occasion, when I was about to have a bath, the queen appeared to me again, this time standing on a cloud, and expressed her disappointment with my father's decision to build a church with her wealth. She promised to withdraw her riches and warned me never to reveal her plans to anyone or I will lose my life. Then she disappeared. Soon enough, my father began to incur losses on my farm. His business was no longer prospering, and he eventually fell victim to swindlers, which made him lose all his savings. From there, he began to start again from scratch. I was registered in a boarding school. Initially, the plan was that the queen would be sending over my daily meal to me. So, I would be eating with my schoolmates, dipping my hands into my plate and eating what looks like normal food with the rest, but my own meal would be human flesh. I also permitted other students to eat from my plate on occasion. The plan later changed when the queen said I would have to come to their realm for my food, so I became a truant, often absent from class. My parents relocated to Nigeria from Cameroon at this time, but I wasn't functioning normally in school, as I would most times not be present in class, but find myself playing and chasing around with the queen in her palace. In my senior classes, the queen told me to start giving out their products to my hostel mates, that anyone who uses these products will become initiated, except if they were the kind of people in the ring. I didn't understand this cliché, so when I asked the queen who the people in the ring are, she said they were the people seeking an opposite power, and she taught me how to identify them. It's impossible for the Queen of the River to control Christians, but as for others who are not born again, they are like toys in her hands. I intentionally placed my soaps and tubes of toothpaste in bathrooms and displayed other personal care products freely, so they would be readily used by my hostel mates. The first student I initiated using a hair cream was a student named Haruna, a northerner. I also initiated others as well. When I was through with schooling, I began to live with one of my elder brothers in the Republic of Benin, who was into the supply of goods and had a warehouse. The queen instructed me to rent a room outside to house my own unlimited supplies from the spirit world. I steadily began to mix these goods with the ones my brother was selling. After a period of time, the queen suddenly ordered me to leave that country as soon as possible and relocate to Nigeria, where they want me to set up my work. I dumped my brother's warehouse key, stole some of his possessions, and returned to Nigeria. My excuse to my parents was that my brother was maltreating me. Now living in Benin City, Nigeria, the queen instructed me to rent a 2-room flat in an outskirt of town and ordered me to go buy an earthen pot from the 5th cellar at a particular market of her choice. When I did, she told me she'd be right back and vanished into thin air. When she appeared again, she brought 4 3x4 sizes of mirrors, and at her command, the mirrors left her hands and became transfixed to the wall of the room. Then she chanted an incantation, and after a while, a strong white light began to shine through the mirrors, and 4 men appeared in them. The earthen pot was magically filled with blood and passed through the mirrors to these 4 men who served as witnesses to the ceremony. The queen told me that no one else is to enter this room, as it was now my working room. This was where I would be housing the materials unlimitedly supplied from the spirit world. The queen also gave me something looking like peppermint to chew, telling me it would give me the power to change into anyone I wished in the discharge of my duties. From there, I began to go to named schools in the city, posing as a hawker to sell snacks to students. All the people I initiated, I knew their physical identities through the mirrors in my room. These were my agents. I would also change into a sophisticated lady to supply goods wholesale to retail sellers. My agents numbered into hundreds. Chapter 6. My initial encounter with the power of God. My first encounter with the power of Jesus Christ was a time I was strolling through Benin City, and I saw a series of posters of an upcoming crusade organized by now late Archbishop Benson Idahosa. As I looked at the words Christ on the poster, the magical rings on me began to burn my toes and fingers, so I refrained and awaited the date of the event. While the open-air crusade was going on and the minister was preaching, I was watching from a certain place, and I chanted an incantation, and it began to rain. The rain disorganized the crusade ground, and many people began to scamper, looking for shelter. I watched as Idahosa closed his eyes and dished out a command, and the rain stopped abruptly, and people began returning to the field. After an hour, the crowd actually doubled. This was a strange occurrence to me, as I had never experienced anyone counter my powers before. So I gave up. When I met with the Queen, I narrated my experience. The Queen told me, "The reason you were defeated is because the man Idahosa and about 1/4 of the people at that crusade ground were among the people in the ring, and you couldn't overcome them. But I know how you can boost your powers. I will take you to India for an earthly initiation, and with that, you will easily deal with these people in the ring." Thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel.